Hey, before I go on, take a second. If you've ever been the disappointment, if you've ever been the one they underestimated, like the video. Subscribe only if you genuinely connect, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from. Now let me take you back. My name is Thea Anders, and I'm 29 years old. You were always our biggest disappointment, my mother said while sliding a pen across the dining room table so I could sign away my inheritance in front of 12 relatives. That was 3 years ago. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence in that room did the work for her. My sister Victoria sat to her left, composed and elegant in cream linen, hands folded like she was accepting an award. My father sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed on a crystal water glass as if it contained the only truth he was willing to face. The documents in front of me were neatly stacked, tabs color-coded, a lawyer standing off to the side pretending neutrality. I was being asked to sign away my rights to a $4 million estate. The house, the beach property, the investment accounts, all of it. In exchange for what my mother called family peace. I remember the smell of lemon polish on the mahogany table. I remember my aunt shifting in her chair like this was mildly uncomfortable but ultimately necessary. I remember Victoria's diamond bracelet catching the light. You've always been impulsive, my mother continued. Unstable. This is for the best. Unstable. Because I left law school. Because I chose interior architecture instead of corporate litigation. Because I didn't marry a hedge fund manager by 25. My father still didn't look at me. The lawyer cleared his throat. It's simply a voluntary relinquishment, he said softly. If you don't sign, the estate will enter dispute. It could get messy. Messy. That was the word they feared most. Not unfair, not cruel. Messy. Victoria finally spoke. Thea, please don't drag this out. You know Mom and Dad always worried about your decision-making. Her voice was sugar over steel. I looked around the room. Not one person defended me. Not one person asked if I was okay. They had already erased me in their minds. Signing the paper was just paperwork. I picked up the pen, and for a second I thought about refusing. I thought about standing up and telling them what I really believed. That Victoria wasn't perfect, just obedient. That my mother's control wasn't love. That my father's silence was complicity. But I didn't. Because something inside me had already shifted. They thought they were stripping me of something. They were freeing me. I signed. My mother exhaled like she'd just avoided a scandal. Victoria smiled, small, victorious. My father stood up first. Good, he said. Just that. Good. I walked out of my parents' house that afternoon with nothing. No money, no family, no safety net. I didn't even take a suitcase. 3 years. 3 years of building from zero. The first year was survival. A studio apartment in New Haven, hand-me-down furniture, freelance interior projects that paid barely enough to cover rent. I ate a lot of rice and eggs. I stopped answering unknown numbers. The second year was growth. A boutique hotel hired me for a redesign. Then a restaurant. My work started appearing in small design blogs. Clients liked my minimalism. They liked my restraint. The third year was momentum, and then the phone call came. It was a Wednesday night. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of my studio apartment, surrounded by fabric samples and floor plans for a client's living room renovation. The radiator. My phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. Hello? Is this Thea Anders? Yes? This is Martin Cole. I'm an estate attorney representing your grandfather's trust. I froze. My grandfather? I asked carefully. Yes, Anders Holdings Trust. There seems to have been a significant oversight. My pulse started to pound in my ears. I don't understand, I said. There was a pause on the other end. It appears, he continued slowly, that the estate you signed away 3 years ago did not include controlling shares in Anders Holdings International. The room felt smaller. I was told that was part of it, I said. That's the oversight, he replied. It wasn't. Silence. Your grandfather structured the trust in a way that bypassed your parents entirely. The controlling shares were never theirs to give. My breath caught. And who are they registered to? I asked. Another pause. You. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Thea, he said gently, as of your grandfather's death, you've been majority shareholder for 3 years. The radiator clanked again, and suddenly I understood something. The $4 million estate they fought over? That was decoration. The company? That was the foundation. And what is Anders Holdings valued at? I asked. The line went quiet for just a second too long. Then he said a number. And 3 years later, when my father finally heard that number, he repeated the same 2 words over and over. Oh God. The line stayed quiet after he said the number. I didn't react right away. Because sometimes your brain refuses to process information that large. Anders Holdings International, he repeated gently, like I might have misheard. Current valuation sits just under $87 million. 87 million, not 4, not 5, 87. The radiator clanked again, absurdly loud in the silence of my apartment. My studio suddenly felt too small for the information it was holding. That can't be right, I said. It is, Martin replied. Your grandfather created a dual-structure trust 15 years before he passed. Voting control transferred directly to you upon his death. The remaining estate, the properties, liquid assets, those were separate. Separate. Meaning when my parents gathered everyone around that polished mahogany table, they hadn't been dividing the empire. They'd been dividing the furniture. And my parents? I asked carefully. They are minority beneficiaries, he said. Non-voting. Non-voting. The word settled in my chest like gravity. They don't know? I asked. They were notified that controlling shares were held in trust, he said. But the trust terms were sealed until you activated them. I didn't activate anything. You just did, he replied. Silence stretched between us. What happens now? I asked. Now? Martin said calmly. We schedule a board meeting. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled every public record I could find. Every article. Every annual report. Anders Holdings International. My grandfather's company. Energy logistics. Infrastructure acquisitions. International shipping contracts. Quiet. Profitable. Stable. My parents had always described it like a modest family enterprise. They had lied. The board consisted of 7 members. My father held 1 seat. Victoria held none. And as of 3 years ago, I held controlling interest without ever knowing it. The next week, I took a train to Boston. Not first class, not dramatic. Just me, a leather portfolio, and the same winter coat I'd owned for years. The headquarters building was glass and steel. Understated wealth. The kind that doesn't beg for attention because it doesn't need it. When I walked in, the receptionist smiled politely. I'm here to see Martin Cole. Her expression shifted when she saw the name on my ID, Thea Anders. Recognition flickered. The elevator ride felt surreal. Martin met me in a conference room overlooking the harbor. He was older than I expected. Calm. Observant. You look like your grandfather, he said after a moment. I didn't know how to respond to that. He was very precise, Martin continued. He didn't believe in rewarding noise. He rewarded instinct. Why me? I asked. He studied me carefully. You left. I frowned. When your parents pushed for structural changes years ago, aggressive expansion, leveraged debt, Your grandfather disagreed. He believed they were more interested in appearances than stability. That sounded familiar. He watched you walk away from law school, Martin said. He watched you build something on your own. No shortcuts, no family money. I felt my throat tighten. He told me once, Martin continued quietly, that the child willing to lose everything was the only one he trusted with anything. The words hit deeper than the 87 million. 3 years ago, I thought I had nothing. 3 years ago, my grandfather had handed me everything. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. My father would be there. He didn't know yet. Martin had sent formal notice that controlling shareholder presence was required. He assumed it was procedural. Routine. He assumed wrong. Friday morning, I wore black. Not for drama, for clarity. When I walked into that boardroom, my father was already seated. He looked older than I remembered, slightly thinner, still composed. He glanced up casually when the door opened. Then he froze. Victoria wasn't there. She didn't have a seat. Thea, he said slowly. The board members looked between us. Martin cleared his throat. Let's begin. My father's eyes narrowed. What is she doing here? Martin didn't look at him. Ms. Anders is majority shareholder. The air changed. That's not possible, my father said immediately. It is, Martin replied calmly. As of 3 years ago. 3 years. The exact amount of time since I signed away everything. My father looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. You signed your rights away, he said. To the estate, I corrected softly. Martin slid the trust documents across the table. My father didn't touch them. He stared at me instead. How much? He asked finally. I didn't answer. Martin did. 87 million in valuation. Majority control. The room went very quiet. And that's when it happened. My father leaned back in his chair slowly. His hand moved to his forehead, and he said the same 2 words over and over like a man watching his entire world tilt sideways. Oh God. Oh God. Not anger, not denial. Realization. Because he understood something in that moment. He hadn't erased me. He had surrendered control, and control was the only thing he ever loved. This is where the real shift begins. My father didn't look at me for the rest of that meeting. He stared at the documents like they might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. They didn't. The board members were careful, polite, corporate. But I could see it in their posture. Recalculation. Alliances quietly shifting. People who had aligned themselves with my father for decades now measuring the room again. Control had moved, and everyone felt it. When the meeting adjourned, my father finally stood. He walked toward me slowly, not angry, not shouting, just stunned. You knew? He asked. No, I said honestly. I found out Wednesday. His jaw tightened. You could have told me. I held his gaze. You could have looked at me when I left. That landed. He didn't apologize. He wouldn't. Instead, he said the only thing he knew how to say. What do you want? It was almost sad, because he still believed everything was a transaction. I want governance transparency, I said calmly. No leveraged expansion without board approval. No personal expense routing through subsidiaries. And I want the offshore account audits reopened. His eyes sharpened, so he did know. You're going to dismantle everything I built? He asked. No, I said softly. I'm going to stabilize it. That's when he realized something else. This wasn't revenge driven by emotion. This was competence. And that frightened him more. Victoria called that night. I let it ring twice before answering. How long? She asked immediately. How long what? How long have you been planning this? There it was. the assumption that I had orchestrated some long-term takedown. "I didn't know," I said. She laughed sharply. "Please, you always thought you were smarter than us." "No, I just learned how to survive without you." "You inherited the houses," I said evenly, "the accounts, the lifestyle." "That's not the point," she snapped. "It is," I replied. "You fought for visible wealth. I inherited structural control." Silence. Then quieter. "Are you going to cut us out?" I thought about that. I could. Legally. Easily. "No," I said finally. "But dividends will be tied to performance. No more withdrawals without justification." "You're punishing us." "No," I said again. "I'm professionalizing the company." She hung up. My mother waited 3 days before calling. Her tone was different this time. Measured. "Thea," she began carefully, "families don't weaponize assets." I almost smiled. "You taught me that assets determine security," I replied. That was different. "No," I said softly. "It wasn't." There was a long pause. "You embarrassed us," she said finally. And there it was. Not hurt. Not regret. Embarrassment. "You erased me," I said. "Publicly." "You signed," she insisted. "Yes," I agreed. "And you miscalculated." That ended the conversation. Over the next 6 months, I restructured Anders Holdings quietly. I didn't fire my father. I moved him to advisory. No unilateral authority. No unchecked decisions. He hated it. But he stayed. Because even diminished control was still proximity to power. Victoria tried launching her own venture with her inheritance. It failed within a year. My phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. "Hello? Is this Thea Anders?" "Yes?" "This is Martin Cole. I'm an estate attorney representing your grandfather's trust." I froze. "My grandfather?" I asked carefully. "Yes. Anders Holdings Trust. There seems to have been a significant oversight." My pulse started to pound in my ears. "I don't understand," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "It appears," he continued slowly, "that the estate you signed away 3 years ago did not include controlling shares in Anders Holdings International." The room felt smaller. "I was told that was part of it," I said. "That's the oversight," he replied. "It wasn't." Silence. "Your grandfather structured the trust in a way that bypassed your parents entirely. The controlling shares were never theirs to give." My breath caught. "And who are they registered to?" I asked. Another pause. "You." I didn't speak. I couldn't. "Thea," he said gently, "as of your grandfather's death, you've been majority shareholder for 3 years." The radiator clanked again, and suddenly I understood something. The $4 million estate they fought over? That was decoration. The company? That was the foundation. "And what is Anders Holdings valued at?" I asked. The line went quiet for just a second too long. Then he said a number. And 3 years later, when my father finally heard that number, he repeated the same 2 words over and over. "Oh God." The line stayed quiet after he said the number. I didn't react right away. Because sometimes your brain refuses to process information that large. "Anders Holdings International," he repeated gently, like I might have misheard. "Current valuation sits just under $87 million. $87 million, not 4, not 5, 87. The radiator clanked again, absurdly loud in the silence of my apartment. My studio suddenly felt too small for the information it was holding. "That can't be right," I said. "It is," Martin replied. "Your grandfather created a dual-structure trust 15 years before he passed. Voting control transferred directly to you upon his death. The remaining estate, the properties, liquid assets, those were separate. Separate. Meaning when my parents gathered everyone around that polished mahogany table, They hadn't been dividing the empire.